General Hospital will reveal interesting facts on Tuesday, May 6, 2025. First, after the chaotic incident at the picnic. The entire family was plunged into shock and heartache as they witnessed Rocco lying unconscious on the grass, his breath faint and the smell of alcohol still clinging to his shirt. At first, everyone assumed he had simply gotten drunk, but when doctors confirmed that a powerful sedative had been found in Rocco's bloodstream, what seemed like a careless accident instantly escalated into a terrifying reality. Lulu could barely contain her emotions upon seeing her son in such a state. Her eyes burning with fury, not just toward Rocco, but also toward the unknown figure who had so cruelly drugged him. Dante, seasoned and composed, kept his anger in check, though his disappointment was evident in every gesture and glance. When Rocco finally regained consciousness after several hours of monitoring and medical treatment, silence filled the room. No one raised their voice, no accusations were thrown, but that silence weighed heavier than any harsh word could. The guilt gnawed at Rocco's soul. And once he was strong enough to sit up and face his parents, his apology poured out like a torrent. He admitted to his recklessness, acknowledged his naivete in failing to question the drink handed to him, and apologized for making his mother suffer, for shaking his father's trust, and most of all, for not protecting himself from a trap he should have seen coming. Lulu quietly left the hospital room after her son's apology, tears trailing down her cheeks, not only from anger but from the deep, gnawing fear that she had failed to shield her child from the dangers of the world. Dante remained behind, silent, his gaze conveying everything, frustration, turmoil, and a firm resolve to uncover who had dared to harm their son. Both parents knew that Rocco was now facing the heavy consequences of a mistake born from a moment of youthful foolishness. Still, they also couldn't ignore the fact that someone had deliberately drugged him, not as a joke, but with intent. The days that followed were tense in the Spencer Falconeri household. Lulu began retracing every detail of the picnic, scanning guest lists, rewatching footage, and mentally reconstructing the scene. Dante reached out to contacts from his past in law enforcement, discreetly gathering medical records and cross-referencing witness statements. Their goal was clear: to expose the person responsible for Rocco's near-tragic poisoning. There was no room for forgiveness now, only silence and the determination to reach the truth. Meanwhile, Rocco withdrew into himself, barely able to meet his parents' eyes, let alone leave the house. He lived in a state of crushing remorse but slowly began to understand the real-world dangers lurking behind seemingly innocent moments. No one in the family believed this was a simple accident anymore. Piece by piece, a darker narrative began to take shape. One witness recalled seeing Rocco accept a drink from a stranger who later vanished from all group photos and video clips of the night. That revelation deepened the mystery. Dante became convinced this wasn't just the act of a reckless prankster, but a calculated move, possibly linked to a hidden vendetta they hadn't yet uncovered. Lulu couldn't sleep for nights. The image of her son passed out on the grass, pale and cold, haunted her. Even after hearing his apology, her heart remained tormented and full of unanswered questions. She blamed herself for not keeping a closer eye on him, for letting him slip into a danger she hadn't foreseen. But her anger gradually transformed into fierce resolve. She no longer scolded Rocco. Instead, she demanded details, sharpened questions meant to unlock every memory he had of that night. As their investigation deepened, Dante and Lulu found themselves navigating a web of deceit and connections that Rocco had never realized existed. Friends he thought were loyal, invitations that seemed harmless. All began to look like pieces of a far more sinister puzzle. What was the real goal? Was Rocco the true target, or was this a warning meant for someone else in the family? With a past marked by painful history, the family knew better than to underestimate even the faintest threat. Now, their instincts were on high alert. And they vowed not to rest until the truth was uncovered. Rocco, in the meantime, understood that his apology couldn't erase what had been done. But it marked the first step toward redemption. And perhaps, his first true moment of maturity, not defined by age, but by the realization that every decision carries weight. And as Lulu and Dante hunted for clues in the shadows, Rocco made a silent vow to never be blindsided again. Whether that promise would be enough to shield him from the secret still lurking in the dark, however, remained to be seen. Second, Drew had received a piece of crucial intelligence, an anonymous tip delivered with caution but undeniable clarity. Forcing him out of the haze of confusion and into the cold reality he had long suspected but never proven, he had been set up. This wasn't a misunderstanding or a reckless mistake, it was a calculated plot executed with precision and malice. And behind the entire operation stood Nina, the very woman he once trusted. The one he believed, if not aligned with him, would at least uphold a certain line of decency. The information was detailed, specific, and damning. The informant revealed that Nina had hired a prostitute to seduce Drew during a carefully orchestrated charity event where attention was intentionally diverted away from him. The woman approached him with feigned warmth, and soon after, ketamine had been slipped into his system without his knowledge. The disorientation, the memory gaps, the loss of control, everything Drew had experienced now made horrific sense. This wasn't just about character assassination. It was about obliteration, of his reputation, his dignity, and perhaps even his future. And worst of all, it was done with full awareness of the consequences. Rage surged through Drew like wildfire. He felt violated, betrayed to the core, and burning with a thirst for retribution. Nina hadn't just crossed a line, she had obliterated it. But as fury clashed with reason, one thing kept Drew from lashing out immediately: Willow. She was the one person who had stood by him during the media onslaught, who had defended him when even he began to doubt himself. He feared what would happen if she learned the truth, that her own mother was the mastermind behind the scandal meant to destroy him. He feared not for himself, but for Willow's heart, her sense of family, and the fragile bridge she had tried to rebuild with Nina. Exposing the truth could mean shattering everything Willow had fought so hard to preserve. Still, Drew couldn't let it go. He couldn't live with the lie. So he began to gather evidence, quietly and meticulously. He spoke to no one. He avoided public moves. Every step was calculated. Every lead followed in silence. He combed through financial records, security footage, and social connections that now appeared suspicious in retrospect. Slowly, the picture formed. Nina had orchestrated the setup, but not alone. It became clear that someone else had been helping her, someone with resources and access, someone powerful enough to conceal transactions, manipulate evidence, and control narratives. This wasn't just a personal vendetta. This was something bigger, and far more dangerous. It was now a war being waged in the shadows, with Drew at the center. Meanwhile, Nina carried on as if her plan had gone undetected, believing that Drew was either too damaged or too afraid to retaliate. She didn't know he was already 10 steps ahead. She didn't realize that the man she tried to destroy was no longer a victim, but a force preparing to strike back with ruthless precision. But even as Drew moved forward, he remained trapped in a moral paradox. To bring Nina down, he might have to break Willow's heart. Could he really do that? Could he watch her unravel as her mother's betrayal came to light? Or was there a way to bring Nina to justice without dragging Willow through the wreckage? One thing was certain, Drew was no longer the same man. He had been drugged, humiliated, and framed, but he had emerged more dangerous, more focused, and more relentless than ever. The clock was ticking for Nina, and when the truth finally surfaced, she would face not only the weight of her crimes, but the wrath of the man she thought she had already broken. Third, Lois fell to her knees beneath the silent fury burning in Dante's eyes, her heart trembling as she pleaded for forgiveness. The truth, buried for so many years, could no longer be contained. In a moment of chaotic emotion, Dante discovered that the child he and Brooke Lynn once brought into the world, a fragile life torn from them under the shadow of misguided decisions, had been taken away by Lois. Not stolen by strangers, not lost to tragedy, but deliberately removed and hidden by someone they trusted most. The revelation shattered Dante's world. As he realized not only had the past been rewritten, but the future he should have had with that child was stolen from him too. Lois, tears streaming down her face, no longer carried the strength she was once known for. All that remained was a mother crushed by the weight of a choice made in fear. She confessed everything, that when Brooke Lynn became pregnant, dangers loomed around her, threats to the Quartermaine family's reputation, and whispers of malicious intent. In a moment of panic, driven by an instinct to protect, Lois decided to remove the child from their lives, believing she was saving it from harm. But what she hadn't foreseen was that her attempt to protect would become the deepest wound of all. Now, all she could do was beg Dante to forgive her, and vow, with the last shred of her conscience, that she would find the child, no matter the cost. Yet, while Dante struggled to process the weight of the confession, a far more dangerous storm was forming. Tracy, who had long suspected something was wrong, had been quietly piecing the puzzle together. With her sharp instincts and unyielding resolve, Tracy had begun connecting the dots, the inconsistencies in Lois's stories, the subtle reactions during conversations, and most importantly, the growing realization that Gio, young, talented, and unknowingly entangled in this secret, might be the missing child. If Tracy was right, then a bomb was about to explode at the heart of the Quartermaine family, one that would shake its foundations to the core. The revelation wouldn't just rewrite a birth certificate. It would unravel the fabric of trust, betrayals, and long-buried guilt. Brooke Lynn, who had grieved the loss of that child for years, would be blindsided by the knowledge that the boy she once thought lost had been right in front of her, under a different identity. And Dante, how would he face the crushing realization that his son had grown up without knowing him, that fatherhood had been stolen by a choice he never got to make? Gio, who had lived his life believing he was simply part of the Cerullo Quartermaine legacy, would be thrown into an emotional maelstrom. How would he react upon learning that everything he believed about himself, his name, his roots, his family, was part of a carefully constructed illusion? Tracy holding this truth was a double-edged sword. She could expose it for justice or manipulate it to control everyone involved, depending on what best served her interests in the family's ongoing power struggles. In the shadows of forgotten memories, everyone now walked on fragile ground. A mistake buried in the past was threatening to ignite a chain reaction of irreversible consequences. And once the truth about Gio finally came to light, the fallout could shatter lives. When the bomb explodes, will anyone be left standing among the wreckage of the truth? Fourth, Alexis found herself backed into an increasingly suffocating corner. With the walls closing in faster than she could respond. Already burdened by the weight of personal and professional battles, she was now once again ensnared by Ava's relentless manipulation. Ava, never one to waste a moment of weakness, had seized upon Christina's past mistake, the tragic accident that had left emotional scars none of them could erase. It had been a dark chapter they all tried to put behind them, but for Ava, it remained a powerful tool, one she wielded with precision and cruelty. With cold calculation, Ava used the knowledge of Christina's role in the accident as leverage, forcing Alexis into a second round of blackmail. Despite already having paid the price once, financially, emotionally, and morally, Alexis was now faced with a new demand. Ava's threats were veiled behind thin civility, but the message was unmistakable: comply, or watch your daughter's life unravel. The stress of carrying this burden alone, of shielding her daughter from further humiliation and legal scrutiny, was eating Alexis alive. Her strength, once rooted in principle and control, was now beginning to fracture under the strain. Each new demand left her more depleted, and the fatigue etched itself deeper into her face, into the heaviness of her silence, and into the growing despair in her eyes. Unaware of the full extent of her mother's suffering but carrying her own weight of guilt, Christina found herself increasingly isolated by the echo of her own regrets. The accident, once buried deep in the past, had never truly left her. The guilt followed her in every quiet moment. In every glance from those who had once believed in her. She had tried to move on, to live a life of meaning and redemption, but now that the truth had resurfaced in the most poisonous way, the shame returned with even greater force. In a rare moment of vulnerability, Christina turned to Lucky. Something in his presence, his quiet empathy, his own history of wrestling with ghosts, made him the only person she could open up to without fear of judgment. She spoke not with dramatics but with an aching sincerity, confessing the depth of her regret. The accident had changed her. It had shaken her identity, made her question her worth, her choices, even her place within her family. What hurt most was seeing how her mistake continued to haunt Alexis. Knowing that her mother was still paying the price, still being extorted, left Christina with a sense of helplessness she couldn't shake. She didn't try to excuse her past. She didn't ask for forgiveness. What she wanted was clarity, some kind of reckoning with herself that could allow her to move forward without dragging everyone she loved deeper into the wreckage. As she confided in Lucky, she admitted how much she feared the day when everything would come crashing down, when Ava would finally push Alexis beyond her limit, when the truth would no longer be containable, and when the damage would become irreversible. Alexis, meanwhile, walked a tightrope over a pit of silence and shame. She wanted to protect Christina, but each step she took in acquiescing to Ava's demands only deepened the pit. The blackmail wasn't just draining her resources, it was eroding her sense of self. A once formidable legal mind and advocate, Alexis now found herself in a moral quagmire, unable to fight back without destroying the one person she had tried so desperately to shield. But how long could she continue like this? How many more demands would Ava make? And when the moment came, when the weight became too much, would Alexis break, or fight back with everything she had left? And as Christina stood on the threshold of self-reckoning, and Alexis neared the edge of collapse, a quiet storm began to brew, one that could either bring about redemption or completely unravel the Davis family from the inside out.